everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com.
Happy Wednesday morning, and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm AJ, doing this episode solo here in hot Austin, Texas. This week, we're going to keep it short and sweet. We've got some news and updates. We're going to leave out the core content, but next week, Eric and I will get back to our normal show structure where we will do news and updates as well as take a deep dive on some topic for the core content. Show notes for today's episode can be found at abroaders.com/180. Can't believe that we've already done 180 episodes. So as far as news and updates goes this week, we've got an update on Virgin and what's going on with them in Alaska. We've got some good news for those that want to go to Hawaii. We've got some bad news for those that have been paying their mortgage with Plastiq. An interesting tidbit on the TSA and some fingerprinting technology. An update on U.S. travel to Cuba, as some of you may have heard about. A really good Amex offer, and then a final reminder for buying Alaska miles. Like I said, show notes for today's episode can be found at abroaders.com/180. So the first thing that we're going to touch on is Virgin America Elevate. So they've finally announced some dates as far as this partnership goes and some of their transfer partners, because Alaska is taking over Virgin America, and now we actually have dates on essentially what you can do with your Virgin Elevate miles and when you have to use them by. So ultimately, it looks like January 1st is when they're going to completely discontinue the Virgin America Elevate program, and it looks like that is when, if you have any Virgin Elevate miles, those miles are going to be converted to Alaska mileage plan. But as far as for the folks out there that have points and they want to put them to use, looks like this fall is going to be when that is going to end as far as partnership stuff goes. So the last day to redeem points on some Virgin partners, September 30th is a lot of them, so it'd be Emirates, Hawaiian Airlines, Singapore Airlines, and Virgin Australia. And as well, that's also the last day to earn points. I'm looking at a little chart here, thanks to 1 mile at a time. So I guess the key takeaway here is if you have, Virgin Elevate miles and you want to, ultimately put them to work, or if you really like this program, you've only got a couple more months to do this. And I believe it is actually travel through the beginning of 2018. But either way, it's all going to be ending on January 1. So here's what Virgin has to say about it. On January 1st, 2018, Alaska's award-winning mileage plan program will become the sole loyalty program for Virgin America. In the meantime, Elevate members can keep earning and redeeming points on our partners through the end dates below. Have questions or want more details? And so, like I said, those partners, the end of those partnerships will be September 30th. So ultimately, like I said, if you got some of those miles and you want to use them, it looks like you have until the end of September 30th to take advantage of their partners. And either way, your miles will ultimately, if you do nothing, your miles are going to be converted into Alaska miles. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but per 1 mile at a time, it says his final scoop is just, as of October, you're probably best off just converting your Virgin America points into Alaska miles with a 30% bonus where they'll be most useful. So looks like until October, you've got a chance to convert your Virgin miles to Alaska with a 30% bonus. So that is not all bad. And like we've touched on before, Alaska's a really good program. I know that some of the Virgin folks are salty about this, but ultimately Alaska's a really good kind of dark horse program that has, it's just got a lot of unique things about it that make it a stronger program than America, Delta, and United, just based on the versatility, and it's really unique with what you can do with their partners. So as far as the bad news about Plastiq, which is essentially it is a bill pay service. So anybody that happened to be paying a mortgage with Plastiq on a Visa card, it looks like you will no longer be able to do that. Got some notes here. We're not positive if MasterCard and Amex will also be following suit. But for now, it's no longer going to be an option for you folks out there using a Visa card if you want to pay your mortgage. For anyone out there kind of wondering, is this a manufactured spending opportunity? it's my understanding that this is not necessarily a huge opportunity because generally the fee is over 2%. I'm looking up right now; it looks like 2.5%, and that kind of takes you to the point where unless you're just trying to do that to hit a minimum spend so you can get a bonus, that is not a good way to actually do manufactured spending because it's going to be difficult to get enough value on top of the fees you pay ultimately. So not a huge deal for most of you, but if some of you do pay a mortgage with Plastiq and you do so with a Visa card, you're going to want to look into that, especially if you were relying on some of that spend or you're relying on some points you'd be earning based on that spend. So like I mentioned, it looks like the TSA is going to begin testing fingerprint scanning. So this is really interesting, and I'm curious what people out there think. So it looks like they're going to do some initial tests in Atlanta and Denver. So this would be ultimately, it could potentially be an alternative to actually your ID, but I can imagine there's a lot of people out there that aren't exactly thrilled about having their fingerprint on the grid. So I don't know, I'm sure that there's some people that are really opposed to this and they'd much rather show their ID than they would to have their fingerprint in some database. But it'll be really interesting how this turns out because we've already seen JetBlue and we've seen Delta doing some interesting things with facial recognition, and now the TSA is doing some stuff with fingerprinting. So I don't know how I feel about this because all I'm thinking about is in the future if we do get to this fingerprint thing, and now we've got these big systems, and just it seems just like another area where technology can be pretty cool, but at the same time it's a little bit of a liability where if we've just got like fingerprinting kiosks and something happens to them, how much is that going to slow down an airport? Do they have a backup plan? Will they have the people there ultimately to look at passports and IDs if that system goes down or gets corrupted or hacked somehow? So I'm really curious to see how all this stuff with technology at airports goes and ultimately how airports can handle if something goes wrong, because we've all seen, whether it be, I believe, British Airways or just the airport in general, London, and then Eric and I were personally affected by a Southwest tech bug, and it can create a huge nightmare. So, I'm a big fan of technology, but sometimes I think keeping it simple is better. So if any of you have been tuned into the news, we've got an update. President Trump gave a speech in Miami a few days ago where ultimately he's going to reverse some, but not all, the things that ultimately Obama tried to do back in 2015. So the main takeaway here is based on this new rule, or whatever you would call it, it looks like American travelers are not allowed to essentially patronize any hotels or establishment that greatly benefit the Castro regime. So what that looks like is, big hotels or any state-owned entities, Americans are no longer allowed to patronize that. So one interesting thing is, so Airbnb is still in play, and I'm not sure if this is an accurate number, but I was listening to NPR the other day, and they had an expert on there, and they said that in the time that the travel ban or whatever you want to call it was lifted, and Cuba became more accessible for Americans as opposed to doing the old curly shuffle where you could maybe go in there kind of illegally from Mexico. Once there was more legitimate ways to travel to Cuba, and the United States-based airlines traveled there, I want to say it was like Cuban people had made over $40 million on Airbnb. So Airbnb is still in play. And then, a final piece of this that's kind of interesting is technically tourism is not actually allowed for Americans in Cuba. So I'm on 1 Mile at a Time, and he's got a picture of Southwest has a little one-pager where there's 13 types of travel that are permitted, and nowhere on here is tourism. So the first one is a family visit, then official government business, journalistic activity, professional research and meetings, educational activities, religious activities, sports and public events, support for the Cuban people, humanitarian projects, research, information, materials, authorized export activities, or OFAC-specific license. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think I'd be curious to hear if there's a particular one of those people go. Supporting the Cuban people, if you're going to, stay at a place on Airbnb, ultimately their economy is really having a hard time. So that's an awesome way that you can inject a little bit of capital actually to the people of Cuba, not necessarily the government, if you are not too keen on that. So once again, I guess how this changes travel for Americans is you will no longer have the same options as far as, lodging and potentially different activities that you'll be doing in Cuba, because the idea here is that Trump wants to put pressure on Cuba, and ultimately I think he's saying is he wants them to step up their game as far as democracy and human rights goes in order for the United States and its citizens to ultimately support businesses and enterprises that the government owns. So that is that. So in the good news category, what I mentioned earlier in the little teaser at the beginning of the show is United has announced a pretty substantial increase in service to Hawaii. So you might be wondering, why is this a good thing? Well, generally the more flights an airline operates, or the more flights airlines operate to a particular region or city, whatever it be, that's generally good for being able to use points. So that's a good thing, because Hawaii has been somewhat of an elusive destination where Hawaiian Airlines, they've got some interesting transfer partners and they've got an interesting chart, but like Eric and I mentioned maybe a week or two ago, it can be a real pain in the ass to find availability to Hawaii on Hawaiian. But United is going to pick up the slack, so this is really good. So we've got flights from Denver, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. And per the Points Guy, it looks like that United will have its lie flat business class seats and first class seats on all overnight flights between Hawaii, Chicago, Denver, Houston, Newark, and Washington, D.C. So that's really nice. That's something we've run into in the past, is because Hawaii is not your normal domestic flight. It's a much more substantial flight. We've had a lot of clients that have been interested in being in a decent business class seat for that trip, and that was not always an option based on just the airlines and ultimately the configurations of the planes that were servicing that route. So this is really encouraging that it looks like there's going to be a better opportunity to head to Hawaii in a legitimate modern lie flat first class or business class fleet, depending on how you cut it. So that is really good news. And one more time, we've got Denver, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco are a handful of the cities that will be servicing Hawaii at a higher frequency. So that is good news for those of you that want to head to Hawaii, which is actually a lot of you out there. That's a pretty common destination. We get a lot of travel plans coming in for people that want to go to Hawaii. So that is good news for all the folks with either United Miles or Chase Points. So as I mentioned, Airbnb, as far as Cuba goes and how much money that is injected into kind of the people's economy of Cuba, not the government's economy. Speaking of Airbnb, there is a targeted Amex offer that if you've got an Amex card, if Amex offers are something you're into, you definitely want to check this out. So with Airbnb, the offer is receive $50 back with stays of over $150 or more. So you got to pay for your stay before September 8th is the fine print. And this must all be in a single booking, so it isn't $150 in the aggregate, and then you get $50 back. So with a particular booking before September 8th, you will get $50 back. So that's a really good deal. So depending on how long you'd be in a place, it wouldn't be ridiculous to figure out a way to spend $150 on Airbnb, get $50 back. So your net cost there for a $150 booking would be $100, but even if your stay is going to be $250, $300, whatever it'll be, Airbnb is generally pretty competitive on pricing. So this $50 back could be a nice one. So take a look in your Amex offers, and also I'm curious to see if any of you were targeted for this. Let us know, because often these things are targeted, and there's no great way to predict who's going to be eligible for these offers. Eric and I are eligible for a lot of them because we've got a lot of cards. But yeah, like I said, if you did get targeted for this offer, let us know. If you got targeted for something similar but different, also let us know, because that's always good to know and interesting, and that can ultimately help us help you in the future. The more we learn about the distinctions between the ways that they target and they create these offers. And the final piece of news and updates is just a friendly reminder. So buying Alaska Miles, that promotion ends on July 1st. So by the time this episode airs, you got just a little over a week to take advantage of that. And I'll keep it short and sweet. Just as always with buy miles promotions, don't do so unless you got a particular redemption in mind, or if you are very comfortable with your points and miles skills as far as figuring out a way to put them to work in the future. So if you do not consider yourself an absolute pro and you do not have a particular trip in mind based on Alaska's great frequent flyer program, then it's easy for you. Just don't do it. So that is all for this week in news and updates. And like I said, we will not have core content today, but we will get back to that next week. So thank you for listening. Everyone travel safe and take care.
Hey, brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Eric or AJ at abroaders.com.